Algorithms help us search and sort on the internet in many ways, anticipating our needs and wants. Various industries and governments also use more sophisticated algorithms to help determine business cases or policy decisions. Seems harmless enough, but not all algorithms are effectively policed. Joining us now for more on what all that means in New York, Karen Levy, postdoctoral research associate at the NYU School of Law's Information Law Institute. And with us here in studio, Jonathan Obar, Professor of Communications and Digital Studies at the University of Ontario Institute of Technology. William Huggins, lecturer in finance at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management. And Marina Sokolova, researcher with the Institute for Big Data Analytics and professor at the University of Ottawa. And we are happy to welcome you three here in our studio. Karen Levy, nice to have you on the line from New York. Jonathan, let's get started by your having explained to us what an algorithm actually is. Go ahead.
Right, the toughest job, right? So, quite simply, an algorithm is a very powerful set of instructions that a computer follows to answer a very complicated question. And in most cases, at least the really good algorithms are able to provide these powerful answers to these tough questions. Alan Turing, many years ago, trying to break Nazi code. Many of your viewers may be familiar with the movie that's recently been out, The Imitation Game,
sure.
Right? That was the development of an algorithm to answer a tough question. Fast forward 60 years, right? The Google search algorithm, which has made headlines and is a big reason that they're so successful. In my own research, looking at how internet carriers route Canadian domestic internet traffic, sometimes through the US, subjecting it to NSA surveillance. These are questions and answers that are addressed by algorithms, and also something I hope we will discuss today, data brokers providing answers to questions like who ought to get a job, who ought to get promoted at that job, and who gets to cross the border. These types of
These are very
controversial questions that big data increasingly is helping us to answer.
Just mentioned big data, and that's where I want to go next. Marina, when you say big data, you're referring to what?
When I say big data, I refer to a phenomenon that combines, first of all, aggregation of large, extremely big data sets, available computation, fast, very effective, and open source, and extremely powerful data mining and machine learning algorithms that can work automatically with minimum of human supervision. This is, for me and for our Institute of Big Data Analytics, what we understand by big data.
And is it anonymous?
Unfortunately, I wouldn't say so. In my mind, and that is why I really pursue privacy protection in our data mining applications, big data contains plenty of personal information, and it is quite possible to extract this personal information. As it is, big data is not anonymous at all.
Okay. Will, to you, the use of algorithms in our society, how pervasive is it?
Remarkably so. I think that people are not really aware of how much computers are doing our allocations for us in the background. That's the best way I can sort of describe. There are things, everything from traffic lights running on computer algorithms to Netflix, all running on computer algorithms. People use them every single day
and don't even know it.
And don't realize it.
Okay, traffic lights on algorithms you're not too concerned about, I guess?
No.
Netflix you're not too concerned about, I guess?
Not at all.
Okay. At what point are you concerned?
Algorithms do have the potential to do harm to us, but we've been very careful about policing their use in that sense.
Who's
For
the
example,
we there?
It depends ultimately on who the user is to some extent. The government's been involved on various levels, but for instance, if we were to think about algorithms in military drone technology, we don't let them shoot on their own, for instance. You still have humans involved in that process. So to some extent, we're not simply letting the computers run free, and if we were to, there would be a serious problem for all of us.
Karen, I promise you, we do allow Americans to speak on this program, and as soon as you see this clip, this is from a documentary called Life After Digital. We're going to play a little clip from that, and then we'll come back and chat, and we'll come to you. Roll tape, please.
The data mining industry takes in thousands of companies who have almost unlimited power to extract personal information from us. From every text, every post, every share, every like, and every search. And it happens without our knowledge or permission.
The basic premise of the internet in terms of commerce is there's an entrepreneur who's going to give you something free, collect the data that are available when you use that free product, and sell your data without your knowledge or permission to people you can't identify for purposes you can never know.
The information compiled by the data miners can track our most intimate secrets in ever-increasing detail. Have we ever miscarried? Were we turned down for a raise? Are we cheating on our partners? What ailments do we suffer from? And what prescriptions do we take? And the data gets ever more specific and narrowly focused.
Okay, that whole documentary, if anybody wants to watch it, is on our website, tvo.org. Life After Digital is the name of the doc, so visit the website after we're done, and you can see the rest of that. Karen, near the end of that clip, that did sound very ominous. Do you have an ominous feeling about all of this?
I mean, in my opinion, algorithms and big data are such widespread phenomena that in some cases they help us make decisions very effectively, in probably more effective ways than we could before, right? And then in other ways, because they've become so pervasive and complex and opaque so that it's hard to know what they're doing and it's hard to make them accountable or know if they're resulting in fair outcomes, they can be pretty difficult to regulate. And because of their pervasiveness, their application to insurance contexts, to credit decisions, to employment contexts, I think we have some very big challenges ahead when we try and decide how we want to regulate them.
Well, let me just follow on that, because you said to make them accountable. Who is the them that we are trying to make accountable here so they don't take over our lives in a bad way?
Yeah, that's the tough question, right? I mean, to some extent, algorithms just implement policy. So in some ways, we could say they're just a tool for, making a decision. We've always used tools to make decisions. But because they can, literally use millions of data points, sometimes billions of data points to make decisions, it's very hard to know sort of where accountability should lie. Is it with the designer of the algorithm, or with the institution or policy body that's decided to use it? It's very hard to sort of attribute, I don't want to use the word blame, but to attribute responsibility for responsible use of algorithms.
Jonathan, can you pick up on that? Who are we trying to hold accountable to make sure these things are not a nefarious influence in our lives?
I should make clear that I am very concerned about the rise of big data and how big data products are becoming more mainstream. I was at a university in Toronto. I won't give all of my personal information away on television, giving a talk the other day about how common it is now for universities to outsource their email to Microsoft. This particular university decided that they were going to outsource the student email to Microsoft. And of course the students, when we talked about this, were concerned, but they weren't really sure why to be concerned. I mentioned a study that came out last year from Carnegie Mellon University that describes how employers are increasingly using big data products to circumvent the law when conducting interviews.
How so?
So for example, if you want to find out someone's sexual orientation, someone's religious background, someone's political leanings, things that typically you don't ask in an interview.
Don't ask? Really aren't allowed to ask, actually.
Right, by law in some places, in most places I'd imagine you're not allowed to ask. But if you're an employer who wants to know those things, this study at Carnegie Mellon demonstrates that that is increasingly something that employers and anybody interested in the big data industry potentially could do. So then I asked the students, do you speak about your sexual orientation in your personal private email? And does it concern you that perhaps the fact that the universities are outsourcing that email to Microsoft, an American company, that perhaps 5-10 years down the road, if sexual orientation, something you mentioned in private in your email, is eventually used in a big data product that employer is using, could that affect you? Something that people wouldn't even think about, a connection that people wouldn't even make because they think their email is private. So that's a big concern.
Marina, in which case, is there a way to, I don't even know what the right language is here, opt out of having our very personal private information enter the world of algorithms? Is that possible to do?
Well, I think it's very difficult to do unless you actually opt out of using some services. For example, as it was just suggested by Jonathan, if you use a mail, by definition, by default, everything that you typed in could be processed by the company. So, do we want to opt out of using email? I think it would be very difficult right now.
Well, we saw on TV last weekend, Senator Lindsey Graham from, which Carolina is he? South Carolina, I think, says he's never sent an email in his life.
Well, that's great, but for example, I have to communicate with people, and we know that Hillary Clinton was in a big problem because she didn't even open her account as a Secretary of State. Mm-hmm. So I have to open my account as a professor of University of Ottawa, and I have to have my account with Institute for Big Data Analytics. Otherwise, I would be in big problem. Yes. But also, I think that you raised now a very important question. When we talk about algorithms, we want to understand that algorithms are just lines of codes. They start to work only when we provide data into these algorithms. So I think a big chunk of responsibility lies with people who assemble data sets and give them to algorithms. That's very important to understand.
Who are those people?
That's a very good question. Okay, here we can say we saw a big development and a big change in how data sets are assembled. That actually, the phenomenon in the phenomenon of big data, it's the contributing factor number one from my point of view. Let's say even 10 years from before today, most of the data was created in a controlled environment. Now, almost anybody could go outside and create data sets from publicly available data on the internet. So, when we talk about regulation of algorithms, I would say let's pay attention on who creates data.
Can I,
Please,
sorry to interrupt, just to jump in. One of the things I always tell my students is, I mean, of course, it's going to be difficult to opt out of certain websites in terms of data collection because a lot of those sites require data collection for them to be used. But increasingly, mobile data, you carry your phone with you wherever you go. I mean, that tracking data is increasingly being used for all sorts of things. I also get students to empty their wallets. I say to them, tell me the cards that you have in your wallets. And of course they say, we got the Shoppers Drug Mart Optimum card, we got the card from Loblaws, we have the Banana Republic credit card. Every single one of those loyalty cards, those credit cards that you have in your wallet, those are also tracking technologies essentially. And you don't need to have a Shoppers Optimum card in your wallet. You don't need to carry the Loblaws card. And by the way, they don't give you those cards because they really want to give you $1 off of milk. They give them to you because they want your data. So there are ways to opt out of giving all of your data away. You don't need to have all these cards in your wallet.
So Karen, just so I understand this, as long as I never send an email, don't go on Facebook, never send a tweet, stay off Instagram, pay cash for everything, never have a credit card, I'm safe. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no. So actually, that's a great point. So my colleague, Janet Vertesi, did an experiment a couple years ago or last year where she was pregnant and she wanted to see how long it took, she wanted to keep it from the internet, right? She wanted to see how long it took before data brokers figured out that she was pregnant. So there was a really kind of well publicized example a few years ago where Target stores started doing a lot of direct marketing to women that it assumed were pregnant based on things that they would buy like unscented lotion, right? So we knew that, and pregnancy is a really salient thing for marketers to know about because pregnant women buy a lot of things. So my colleague wanted to sort of see, well, how do I avoid being detected? And the answer was it was basically impossible because even when she did all the things you talked about, she used Tor, like a protected network, she used cash to pay for things, even those activities of trying to opt out generated suspicion. So, she would go pay cash for purchases and she would be told, this makes you look suspicious, like you're gonna get flagged for this, like this purchase is, we feel like you're trying to opt out, and that itself creates suspicion. And as hard as it is for us to sort of opt out of data collection technologies, it's that much more difficult for people who are marginalized socioeconomically. So if you live in a community that's heavily surveilled or you go to a school that's heavily policed, there is no chance to opt out, right? Just living entails a lot of data collection about you.
So, William, it sounds like we should just not bother trying to rage against the machine. This is the world in which we live. Is that right?
To some extent, that's true. A lot of people like to think about data collection in terms of it's something that's brand new that started happening. 130, 140 years ago, people were counting train cars to see how much goods were being shipped. You could literally post someone outside of a retail organization to see how many people were buying things and roughly how much they were buying. It's not that we couldn't collect this data in the past, it's that it was prohibitively expensive to do so because you had to send human agents to actually do the work for you. Now that people are conducting their transactions online, the cost of tracking that data has fallen dramatically, and that's what's opened up all of these technologies for the most part. It's not that we couldn't do it before, it's that we lacked some of the processing power, but the data was also prohibitively expensive to get.
Do you, in your personal daily life, try to avoid the algorithms as much as you can?
Can't do so.
You can't?
No.
So don't bother.
Not going to try.
Not going to try. Here's from the Financial Times. Let me read this excerpt. This is from about a month or so ago. While U.S. law forbids the discrimination of borrowers based on factors such as gender or race, parsing publicly available information on social networks such as Facebook and Twitter has been shown capable of accurately predicting everything from users' political inclination to ethnicity and sexual orientation. Chief among critics' concerns is the ability to use new types of data and computerized algorithms to build proxies that do not overly discriminate on the basis of factors such as race or gender, but may use correlated information to build an in-depth profile of a particular customer. John, that sounds like what Will just said. You can't avoid it, so that's the world in which we live. Should we not bother trying to avoid it?
I think there are other things that can be done. I think the collection issue is going to be very difficult to overcome just because it's something that's people have been doing for such a long time. It's being built into products. I think where the government can get involved is looking at how organizations use the data as well as who they disclose it to. I think one of the things that I've written about is something that I call representative data sovereignty. This is the idea that we as citizens should be looking to what we call infomediaries to make sure that these organizations are following the rules. This would, in a way, make it so that we as individuals don't have to engage with these organizations. And that, by pushing for these in-between organizations, I think that would start more of a conversation about how we actually could make sure that these organizations are representing us correctly and not taking advantage of us. Because there's certainly a lot of anecdotal examples that point to how individuals are being taken advantage of potentially being discriminated against online.
Let me find out from Karen Levy what's your view. I mean, algorithms discriminating against people, as we saw in that excerpt from the Financial Times. How concerned are you about that?
I mean, it's obviously a source of great concern, but I think what's important to remember is what Marina alluded to, that algorithms don't do anything on their own, right? Algorithms reflect the social and institutional truths of the world in which we live. So, if there is racism, algorithms will pick up, where racism has been present in society, or if there is bias, it'll pick that up. So for example, if say an employer is trying to figure out who to hire, right? And men have always been more successful in a certain career field than women because of all kinds of sources of bias, then the algorithm is likely to just reflect that, right? It'll just say, well, you should hire these men because they've been more successful, right? So there are lots of ways in which algorithms can both mask bias and also reflect the bias that we live with every day.
Do you think people are making enough effort, Marina, to change the coding or the inputting into algorithms so that the discrimination that we've just heard about is less present?
I don't think so.
No, we're not.
My opinion is that this issue might not be yet addressed by community in artificial intelligence. And these are, again, two sides of this story. Okay, one thing is that people who design and implement algorithms. It's another side of the story, people who provide data and who want to use the results of this. So I think this point has to be addressed in both communities.
Do these two factions talk to each other?
Well, I would say it needs more work on talking to each other.
More work.
But I also would like to say that education of what at the Faculty of Medicine we call the general public is very important. For example, we have shown with my colleagues Victoria Bobichev and Stan Matvin that authorship attribution on social networks could reach 97% accuracy. That's how now when I go and I present our work, I usually put what I put on the last slides. Guys, be very vigilant what you say and how you say. Because if we have our footsteps on social networks, again, with 97% accuracy, we can attribute who wrote this, who posted what. And this can haunt us for many days after that. I think that education of the general public really plays a very important role here.
Well, all right, having said that, all right, we're trying to do a little education of the general public right now, but even if they know that all of this is happening, it doesn't sound like there's really much we can do about it, is there?
I'm not sure there's much that the individual can really do other than attempting to trick algorithms, like was alluded to, by sort of moving to cash transactions. But even that will flag you anyways. The real issue is that it's really, really cheap to have a lot of eyes on a lot of people right now. And with 1 billion eyes staring at us, they can collect all kinds of data. And you're probably not going to be able to hide from every form of data collection, no matter how vigilant you want to be, barring moving to a shack in the Yukon.
I quite disagree, actually. I think that Canadian privacy law can certainly be strengthened. Enforcement mechanisms can be put in place so that the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, for example, can do more to hold these organizations to account. At the moment, the privacy law in play, it's called PIPEDA, the Personal Information and Protective Electronic Documents Act, something along those lines. Anyhow, basically allows for consumers to contact these organizations if they want to, that are collecting their data, and ask to look at it, sort of similar to when you contact a credit bureau to check your credit score, right? So what sort of pictures do you have on me? What sort of metadata do you have on me? And then you can check it if you'd like.
And they're obliged to give you that information?
By law, they are, and to also allow you to correct it if it's incorrect. Now, the problem, of course, as we've seen some work being done at the Citizen Lab at University of Toronto, when people actually contact ISPs or these organizations, they don't know where to begin. What data can we give you? How do we let you in to fix it and check it? Then there's the issue of, well, how do we train people to know what to look for? It's kind of easy to understand. I mean, people have learned how to interpret credit scores over the years, but how do you know how to correct the stockpiles of big data and whether they're right or not?
You want to come back on that?
Yeah, it also leads us to a question of, do people know who to contact? Do people know who's keeping data on them? Do we have 500 organizations with data profile of me, or do I have 6?
Right.
It's one thing with a credit rating agency where there are basically 3 of them, and I can contact them all and learn what they have. If I want to contact the police and understand their file on me, that's fine, because I understand that they might keep data. But there are 500 private organizations out there keeping data on me, buying data and correlating it across a number of data sets they've bought from other people. Who do I contact?
Are you exaggerating when you say 500?
I don't doubt that number at all.
You mean 500?
Hundreds of organizations. You got to think, big data companies in Japan might study Canadian consumers simply by buying the data and processing it over there. How do we contact or know what companies overseas we might want to get hold of?
Here's the answer. Why do we hire like an H&R Blocker or an accountant to represent our data come tax time to the government? The tax code is extremely complicated to interpret, right? So what I've written about and others have as well is this idea that I mentioned earlier, representative data managers. The question is, how do we create demand for them? These organizations that perhaps annually we would communicate with, like we do with our accountant, about how our data is perhaps being interpreted and used to affect who gets a job, who gets to cross the border, who gets stopped by the police, who gets a loan and at what rate, and all these things. the question then becomes, how do we regulate these organizations to make sure that they are representing the public correctly? But I mean, we're already seeing some of these representative data managers pop up. There's a company in the US called LifeLock who you can hire to watch your financial data, and banks increasingly are doing this as well. People may have received calls, hey, it looks like someone's using your credit card in a way you shouldn't. Oh, I'm on vacation, I forgot to call you. These are representative data managers doing their job. The question then becomes, how do we generate demand in the general public for representative data managers who look at our photos, who look at our texts, and all the different things that we disclose online? I bet you Jennifer Lawrence would have hired a representative data manager if she knew what could have happened to her personal photographs.
Yes, indeed. Karen Levy, you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so here in the US, we have a lot of the same issues, right? There's a lot of people saying the Fair Credit Reporting Act here is a good model that we should base some future laws on to regulate data collection. And I think that has some legs, but I think it also has its limitations for some of the reasons the other panelists mentioned, right? Namely that, one of the things we like to do when we have an opaque process is to bring transparency to it by letting people see the data or, creating some insight about how different data are being weighed to reach some outcome. And that's a very difficult thing to do when the algorithms are so complicated. You can't just give people a million lines of code and say, okay, it's transparent. That doesn't really help them. And then the other thing I would like to add is just that, as much as I think education can be an essential part of, kind of getting a handle on this and, creating things like data managers, I think that has some real potential. But I still think we need some more top-down kind of government regulatory solutions, in part because of what I mentioned earlier, that for groups that are marginalized, that are poor or have been subject to discrimination in the past, those groups are subject to kind of the negative results of algorithms at sometimes much greater rates and in much more acute ways than we are as middle-class consumers. And it's, I think, much more difficult for those people to opt out in any meaningful way or to have some kind of control over those data flows. So for that reason, I think we really do need some regulatory moves too.
Well, having said that, Karen, let me follow up with this. I presume the companies, maybe the 500 companies Will just referred to, guard these algorithm codes, secrets, very zealously, in which case, how is oversight even possible?
It's a tough thing, right? It's a tough thing. I mean, so the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy a few months ago issued a report on big data that had some proposals, a lot of which, like I mentioned, are sort of based on this Fair Credit Reporting Act model or based on some information privacy principles that have been sort of widely agreed upon. Things like having the ability to correct data if it's incorrect or, having a meaningful way to opt out. I mean, most of the way that we're expected to opt out now is through what are called notice and consent policies, right? Where like a website will tell you, by the way, we're using cookies or we're collecting data about you in this way. And we all know that nobody really reads those, right? You just click through because you have to get to what you want.
Exactly.
So those are not great models. Some of my colleagues at Princeton University have been working on what they call accountable algorithms or algorithmic audits, which are their computer science-based ways to actually just see if algorithms are doing what they say they are. So if it says that something's being selected at random, how do we know that something is being selected at random? So there are some solutions kind of coming from the technical community too, but I think we have a ways to go.
Let me read another excerpt now. This is from the technology columnist for the Independent newspaper from just a few days ago. We humans have to accept that algorithms can make us look comparatively useless. But that doesn't necessarily feel like a good place to be. The increasing amount of donkey work undertaken by algorithms represents a significant shift in responsibility, and by association, a loss of control. Data is power, and when you start to consider all the ways in which our lives are affected by the processing of said data, it can feel like a dehumanizing step. Let's get into this issue of oversight some more then. Marina, what do you suggest in terms of, it seems like we are kind of willingly giving up a certain amount of freedom here because these things just make our lives so much more engaging, fun, and connected, and so on. What do you think?
Well, what I think is that one point that I think we yet to maybe discuss or maybe for something else otherwise is that algorithms become very, very powerful. For example, now opinion mining and sentiment analysis algorithms can interpret what people put in text on their social networks. And this, I mean, they also can detect and identify what people are actually thinking or feeling about the issue. This type of machine learning and text data mining applications became a fully developed field in the last 10, maybe 11 years at most. I think with this, the oversight that we are talking about might be very difficult to apply simply because of the complexity of incredibly good accuracy of algorithms. As I mentioned,
Right.
authorship attribution is 97% correct. And if I may,
Sure.
and this authorship attribution algorithm doesn't need to be very smart. It's not semantically based. It's just character based. How we use? We use emoticons, punctuation marks, and capitalization letters. That's it.
Well, given our suspicion of government these days, you want to give the government the right to have oversight of this?
If we take a look at what's going on in finance, in that particular area, we'll notice that it's not the OSC, for instance, the government regulators specifically, that are trying to determine how they ought to regulate the use of algorithms for financial trading.
The Securities Commission.
Yeah, for the most part, instead of seeing Ontario Securities Commission being involved in this, it's largely IROC, which is the self-regulatory body, which is looking into whether or not algorithms are being used to conduct trading that we wouldn't otherwise allow people to do. In other words, if you're engaging in things like front running or order stuffing, using a computer, we're still finding that this is still sort of morally reprehensible. It's not the sort of activity we want. And the difficulty that IROC's having in their current studies of it is being able to attribute I guess the best word is the intent behind it. Because when you've got so many trades happening so rapidly, it can be difficult to actually determine whether the intent of a particular algorithm is to simply trick people and extract value, or whether it's a legitimate business enterprise. So what's happening is not so much the government regulators stepping in, so much as the industry best practices themselves which are stepping in, so that they don't lose the faith of the general public.
And do you think that's adequate?
I think it's a good first step. If we take a look in finance, historically, self-regulatory organizations have actually been much better than government regulators. If we go back all the way to the 1700s in Great Britain, government regulators didn't do a whole lot of good for the stock market in the 1700s, but the self-regulatory organizations around accountants and around stockbrokers did a great job to improve the overall quality of services offered to the public.
John, what's your view?
I often ask my students, is privacy dead? And the students are like,
What's privacy?
maybe, right? And then I say, it's up to you. Privacy is a civil liberty. And if we want it in this country, we have to fight for it. Sure, top-down initiatives are a good idea, as I've already mentioned, but I think bottom-up ones are a good idea too. So this requires people to get involved, to push their ISPs to be more transparent about where they're routing data, about who they're sharing it with, to be like Max Schrems from Germany, who requested his 1,200 pages of data from Facebook to get a sense of what they're keeping and what they're not keeping. They're keeping everything. Yeah. And this sort of thing. And this will push the government to create stronger laws, to create enforcement mechanisms to hold these companies to account. Because at the moment, in my opinion, the government is barely involved.
Karen, in our last half minute here, let me give it to you. What's your view on this?
I mean, clearly there's a role for bottom-up and top-down movement here. There's a role for industry, there's a role for the consumer, and then there's a role for regulatory bodies. I think in the end, you could understand big data as being sort of the next side of civil rights struggle, in that, its outcomes can have, very severe effects for people who have been subject to discrimination in the past. And just as with those struggles, I think it needs to be sort of a multi-pronged, multifaceted approach to solving some of these issues.
That's Karen Levy from the Information Law Institute at NYU School of Law, along with, on today's program, Jonathan Obar from the UOIT, Marina Sokolova at the University of Ottawa, and William Huggins at U of T's Rotman School of Management. Thanks, everybody, for this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tonight's program was produced by Katie O'Connor, and that is the agenda for Thursday, March 19th, 2015.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.